Okay. Okay. Hello again. We are still trying to finish this top-down shooter. This tutorial is too long, 11 hours, and this month, in the upcoming month, I have too much to do. So we are planning to join Bracky's Jam in the 15th. So I wanna finish this tutorial until 15th. Let's move.
House, I want to keep on working with the time makes it the inner walls. And
Left
for
off when we finish the house.
those, I want to zoom in a bit. And there, for example, side of this area of the greatest thing, and that is because I didn't save the scene. So if is fine, there we go. We have interior walls. If we add more objects inside of it, this would also look much better. Something we are going to work on in a bit. But for now, this section got quite long, so let's finish it here. Now that we have a tile map, we should discuss physics a bit more. In particular, I want to talk about physics layers. And there are two issues we have to address right now. And let me demonstrate all of this in Godot. That should illustrate all of this the best. Here we are back in Godot, and the most obvious issue. If I run all of this, I can still move the player, and I can still shoot, but at some point, once we reach the house, there are no collisions, which obviously is not great. So this is something we have to work on. On top of that though, and let me demonstrate this inside of the editor. We have this area, and this area later on will be a transition point, which means if the player collides with it, we're going to load an inside level. For that though, we want to make sure that only the player can interact with this area. We don't want to load a new area if any other object collides with it. For example, if an enemy moves into it, or if we shoot a laser into it, we don't want to launch a new level. I can actually demonstrate this as well. So if I run all of this again, and if the player goes into the area, we get player has entered the gate and then the player node. And that's totally fine. However, if I'm shooting the grenade into this area, we are get grenade and we also get player has entered the gate, which basically means that we are getting some inconsistent behavior. The reason why we are getting this is that this gate or the area to the inside of the gate only really cares that a body is entering this area. It doesn't care which kind of body. So the body could be the player, but it could also be an enemy, or it could be the grenade. The laser though wouldn't trigger it because that's an area, not a body. But we still have to account for that. Fortunately, that is very easy to do using physics layers, and let's talk about them. In Godot, every collision object has a collision layer. So if you look at any kind of collision object, we could look at the player. Let me open the scene. In there, we have the character body 2D. This is a collision object. And this one on the right inside of the inspector has a collision. In there, we have a safe margin. This one I am just going to ignore. Then we have a layer and we have a mask. This kind of collision system we have for every single collidable object. For example, if I look at the grenade, there, if I minimize the physics, a bit further down, we have collision. And once again, we have a layer and we have a mask. So what does that mean? In Godot, you can place collidable objects on various layers and then also tell them to only interact with objects on a certain kind of layer. And for that, we have a layer and a mask. How the system is going to work is that a layer determines on which layer an object itself is, while a mask determines which layer it can interact with. And this might sound a bit confusing, so let's do an example. Here's the definition again, and in our game, we are going to have multiple layers. We have a layer for the player, the enemies, the objects, the projectiles, and then for items and zones. The player scene, or more specifically, the character body 2D for the player, is going to be on the player layer. But the mask for it is going to interact with all of the other layers, which means that the player can interact physically with all of these other layers. For another example, we have the enemies, and the enemies itself are going to be on the enemies layer. That should be fairly straightforward. However, for the mask, we will only have the player, the objects, and the projectiles, which means enemies can only interact with those layers. They cannot interact with items or zones. And this would fix the gate behavior, where we only want the player to interact with it, but no other object inside of the game. And well, with that, we have a few things to implement. So let's go back to Godot, and then we can make some changes. I want to start with the player scene. In there, we have the character body 2D that we called player. If we look there, on the right, we have collision. The layer is going to set which layer this object is on. And in there, we have a couple of numbers. Right now, they always say layer 1, 2, or 3, which doesn't tell you very much. To make this system a bit easier to comprehend, you want to go to Project, and there, if you scroll down, I already have it selected, we have 2D physics. There you can give layers names that are much more descriptive. In our case, we want to have layer 1 being the player layer, layer 2 is going to be for the enemies, layer 3 is going to be for the objects, layer 4 will be for projectiles, and finally, layer 5 will be for items and zones. Although the naming here really doesn't matter. You can name this whatever you want. You're going to see in a second what difference it is going to make. Now, if I have all of that, if I hover over these layers, now we get for layer 1 player, for layer 2 enemies, and for layer 3, we get objects. On top of that, if I do the same thing for the mask, on number 1, we get player. On number 2, we get enemies. And on 3, we get objects. The same thing we have gotten for the layers.
Not important.
The really important thing you have to understand is that layers and masks talk about the same kind of layers. So for example, right now, the player would be on layer 1, which would be for the player, and it can only see itself. And that is because the mask is also for number 1. However, if I click on number 2, 3, 4, and 5, now the player is still on the layer for the player, but the player can also interact with all of the enemies, all of the objects, all of the projectiles, and all of the areas and items. Although right now, this doesn't do very much, because we also have to update everything else. For that, I want to look at the gate, because this is the easiest thing to work on right now. If I open that scene and click on Area 2D, we once again have a collision. Although now, for the layer, we don't want this to be on layer 1. Instead, the Area 2D should only be on layer 5. And then for the mask, we only want this to interact with the player. We do not want to enable enemies, for example, because this would allow any kind of enemy to interact with this object as well. Or area, not object. But you get the idea. And with that, we should already have a pretty good start. If I now run the game and go into the gate, we still get player has entered the gate. However, if I shoot a grenade, we are still getting the wrong behavior. And this is bringing us to a good challenging point. Let's do an exercise. I want you guys to look at the grenade and figure out why it still triggers the gate Area 2D. As a tip, look at the layers and the mask. For this scene. It should be fairly straightforward. The rigid, as far as the good on layer 4, I think this isn't a print statement anymore. This is exactly what we wanted. Although we also have to update the mask because a grenade is supposed to collide with the player, it is supposed to collide with the enemies, with the objects, and with projectiles itself. Especially the last one, projectiles. This means that one grenade scene can interact with another grenade scene. You can see this, for example, in the game. If I shoot one grenade, and then another grenade, the two grenades interact. If I take this 4 away, they cannot interact with each other anymore. So now if I do the same thing again, they are simply ignoring each other, which is not what I want. So I'm going to enable all of that. All right, next up, we have to update the gate, because in there we have a static body 2D. Inside of the gate, we have the collision, and this one should be on layer 3, which is for the objects. However, for the mask, we want this to be 1, 2, 3, and 4, which means this gate can interact with the player, the enemies, other objects, although this one we don't actually need because none of the objects are going to move. Although for number 4, we want this to interact with projectiles as well. Next up, for the laser, we have an area 2D. Although since this one is also a collision object, we have collision as well. For this one, the layer should be layer number 4 for projectiles, although a laser can interact with the player, the enemies, the objects, but not with other projectiles. I hope at this point you get the system, at least on a basic level. It doesn't get too complicated. The major thing you have to remember is that you want to set layers and masks really early on in the game, because later on, updating all of this can be quite tedious. Although, in our case, we are nearly done. Next up, I want to work on the house, because in there, we have an area 2D that later on I do want to use. So in there, for the collision, I only want this to be on layer, this one should be 5, and it can only interact with the player. So mask should be 1. With that, we have most of the things, although if I hold Control or Command Shift and O, I can open up all of my scenes. In there, we have a few more. The really important one is the drone. This is the one enemy we have right now. This one definitely needs a collision layer because it shouldn't be the player, it should just be enemies. Although it can interact with the player, with other enemies, objects, and with projectiles. Other than that, we have the bat and the billboard, and those should be the last two. Both of them are quite easy, so if I look at the collision, they should both be on the objects layer, and for the mast, they can interact with the enemies and with the projectiles. And then finally, let's work on the billboard, and this one, once again, should be on layer number 3, and it can interact with the player, the enemies, and the projectiles. And with that, we are done updating the physics layers. So let me close all of this because it's going to be really confusing having all of this open. Okay, this is feeling much better. Although I didn't mean to close the house. We're going to use that right now, actually. Cool, so with that, we have collision layers. And this is a really important system to get started with. So the next issue we have to deal with is how can we give the tile map a collision layer so the player can collide with it. And for that, if I minimize the layers and I click on the tile set itself. In there, we have physics layers among a lot of other stuff, but this we can just ignore for now. Physics layers is what we care about. If I click on that, we can add an element. And there, once again, we get a collision layer and a collision mask. And if I hover over them, we get the usual layers. So we have the player, we have the enemies, we have objects, and we have projectiles. And since this is just going to be a static object, 1, 2, and 4 is what I want to select. Although I just realized this is wrong because this should just be number 3, because collision layer is the layer it is on, and it's just going to be an object. However, it can collide with 1, 2, and 4. So the player, the enemies, and the projectiles. Getting these numbers confused is incredibly easy to do, so you do want to be careful here. If I run all of this now, we still don't get the proper behavior. So let me move over. Confused layer is just stuff, but this with it. And for that, if I minimize the layers and I click on the tile set itself. In there, we have physics layers among a lot of other stuff, but this we can just ignore for now. We get 4 is what I want to select. Although I just realized this is wrong because this should just be number 3, because collision layer is the layer it is on, and it's just going to be an object. However, it can collide with 1, 2, and 4. So the player, the enemies, and the projectiles. Getting these numbers confused is incredibly easy to do, so you do want to be careful here. If I run all of this now, we still don't get the proper behavior. So let me move over again. I can still shoot and have grenades as well, but we still don't get a collision. And I think you can understand why quite easily. If we look at this individual tile, Godot roughly knows that there is going to be some kind of collision because we have set a collision layer and a collision mask. What Godot doesn't know is which area can be collided with. All that Godot sees is that there is an image here, but this could mean anything. We could want to have a collision, for example, in a much larger area. As a consequence, we have to draw in the collision area. And for that, inside of the tile set, there we have paint. And it's called paint because we literally paint an area where we want collisions to happen. And let me extend all of this a bit. What I want to do, I want to click on select property editor, and now we have physics layer 0. If I click on that and zoom out a bit on a tile set, they can see the entire tile set. And if I zoom in again on the outer tiles, if I just click on this corner tile, there we get the entire collision area. This means that right now, all of this could be collided with, which is also not what we want. All of this bit and this inner bit should not be collidable. We only want to have the collision around the actual wall. And for that, on this left side, you have a painting area where you can paint in, or rather select an area that you want to have a collision on. And there you have a bunch of points that you want to move around. And right now, we don't have enough points for the curve, but if you click on a path between 2 points, you can add more points. There's no real limit to how many you have, so work with this to your heart's content. You can be very refined with this. Something like this looks good. Now I have an area I actually want to have collisions for. And if I now click on the tile again, this is looking much better. And with that, if I run the game again and go to the area, I should have placed the house a bit closer, but I hope you get the idea. And this wasn't the curve that we needed. I think it was this one. Nope. There we go. Here we are on the right corner, and now we can see I cannot go further than this area. So this is working perfectly fine. Now, since we don't have collision areas for the other tiles, this doesn't work perfectly, but this is something we can work on quite well. Although drawing in all of these areas can be a bit cumbersome, but there are tools to make this easier. So right now I have this drawing area. If I click on another tile, we get literally the same area, which doesn't fit anymore. However, what you can do is click on these 3 dots and then flip horizontally. And now it fits again. Then I can do the same thing for the other corner and now flip vertically and click on the tile again, and there we go. Finally, for the last corner, I can do all of this again and flip horizontally again, and there we go. Now we have the 4 corners, which are the most time-consuming bit. For the straight lines, we can delete a couple of points. Let me get rid of most of them. And then simply move things around. And I didn't mean to delete this one. I just want to move the points. And obviously, once again, this is something for an actual game you do want to spend some time on. But I'm not too concerned with that. So in my case, I'm going to speed all of this up a bit. So this one is looking good. And now, if I run all of this again, once again, I need a bit of walking around, but at least for the outer walls, this is working perfectly fine. Cool. So next up, we have a few more tiles. We have these door and the bits. And for that, let me just draw in the area. So this is looking roughly good. And then for the other bit, I want to have this bit and then flip vertical. Next up, this one for an weak flip horizontally again. The other, what you can do here. So right now I have this drawing area. If I click on another tile, we get drawing in all of these areas can be a bit cumbersome, but there are tools to make this easier. So right now I have this drawing area. If I click on another tile, we get literally the same area, which doesn't fit anymore. However, what you can do is click on these three dots and then flip horizontally. And now it fits again. Then I can do the same thing for the other corner and now flip vertically and click on the tile again, and there we go. Finally, for the last corner, I can do all of this again and flip horizontally again, and there we go. Now we have the four corners, which are the most time-consuming bit. For the straight lines, we can delete a couple of points. Let me get rid of most of them, and then simply move things around. And I didn't mean to delete this one. I just want to move the points. And obviously, once again, this is something for an actual game you do want to spend some time on. But I'm not too concerned with that. So in my case, I'm going to speed all of this up a bit. So this one is looking good. And now, if I run all of this again, once again, I need a bit of walking around, but at least for the outer walls, this is working perfectly fine. Cool. So next up, we have a few more tiles. We have these door and the bits. And for that, let me just draw in the area. So this is looking roughly good. And then for the other bit, I want to have this bit and then flip vertically, and then we are done. Finally, for this tile, we have to create two areas, which is totally doable. So all I have to do is add another shape in there, something like this. And now if I click on the tile, there we have two areas. They are not perfect, but this is just a bit of refinement. What you can do, if you hold Control or Command and use the scroll wheel, you can zoom in. And then with the middle mouse button, you can move around. So this is feeling a bit better. Cool. And then next up, we have left and right. For that, I want to rotate everything right and select both of these. And then I can just delete where a
I dare you as to quit now and play Resident Evil Village. Nah, I don't even have the game. So get it from Steam Reaper. No, thank you. At this age, I only play one game in like 3 months. So no problem. No, thank you. I only have Path of Exile, as you can see. I will be playing in the new league. Like 1 month from now. Okay, we finished this.
Appropriate.
I need to catch up though.
You can move around. So this is another and flip vertically, and then we are done. Finally, for this tile, we have to create 2 areas, which is totally doable. So all I have to do is add another shape in there, something like this. And now if I click on the tile, there we have 2 areas. They are not perfect, but this is just a bit of refinement. What you can do, if you hold Control or Command and use the scroll wheel, you can zoom in. And then with the middle mouse button, you can move around. So this is feeling a bit better. Cool. And then next up, we have left and right. For that, I want to rotate everything right. And select both of these. And then I can just delete where appropriate. And we are nearly done with this part. Okay, there we go. This is the first one. Now I can click on the other one and then flip horizontally. There we go. Now we have all the collision parts for the outer walls. Unfortunately, we have another part, and this is all the collision part for the inner walls. And this is going to be your exercise. Draw all of these areas, and if you get through that, you, well, have some really good practice to drawing in these areas. It unfortunately is kind of repetitive work, and you just have to get through it. Luckily though, it's not particularly difficult.
Really, I wanna draw this with one. Enough for now. Why this don't work? Oh, yes, it's this. Okay.
And the should have
So
mentioned earlier,
this.
there are 3 ways you can interact and draws you over it to also
Yeah,
add points.
if
So
you
this
told
is
this
quite
in
easy.
the start, that
If you
was
just play
way
around
easier.
with all of this, it should be fairly straightforward. But alright, with that, let me zoom out, save the scene, and now inside of the level, I am going to move inside of the ground. We have the house. I'm going to move that a bit closer to the player so I don't have to walk as much. So with that, the outer collisions still work. The gates also work, and the inner walls are also working perfectly fine. And let's try a few more. This feels really good. Now, here there's one thing you have to be slightly aware of. And that is if I reopen the tile map and go back to the tile set and painting, you want to be really careful that when you have, there you can see it quite well. So right now for this one, we have a slight gap, which is right now so minor that you wouldn't really notice it inside of the game. But if this becomes large enough, this might be an area where the player or an enemy could get stuck in, which would be really inconsistent behavior. Oh, and I just realized I messed up a bit. This shouldn't happen. So when you create, especially for walls, these kind of collision shapes, you want to be very careful. And there you can actually see this kind of shape isn't ideal because if the player is coming from one side, so if the player is coming from this area, we might have a collision for this bit, and then the game thinks there's a corner, but there isn't in practice. So when you're drawing these areas, just be aware that you do want to have some very, very detailed shapes, and this is something you absolutely want to work on for a bit. In my case though, for tutorial, this really doesn't matter so much. And with that, we have another super important bit. And let me move the house a bit further away so this doesn't look too cramped. For the next part, to make the game look actually good, I want to talk about particles.
Hi.
And particles are basically small objects that are dynamically generated. The best example for that would be we're going to create some smoke in this part. And for that smoke, we're going to create lots of small dots and then combine them, and to the player this will look like smoke. Also, we're going to add some visuals for the laser, or more specifically, when the laser is shot. I think explaining all of this in practice is going to be much easier. So let's jump straight into Godot. Here we are back in the editor, and I want to create a new scene. And
I'm fine today, thank you. How are you doing? That's a little bit late night, but I can only work in the nights because of my son.
this new scene as a base node is going to get a static body 2D. Let's rename this one to Steam Vent. And then this I can save right away under scenes. Going to get
Static
a
body 2D. Okay.
static body 2D. Let's rename this one to Steam Vent. And then this I can save right away under scenes. There we have objects, and there I want to have the Steam Vent. Cool. Now, this one is going to get a sprite. And the sprite we can get under graphics, and in there we have objects, and under objects we have all the way at the bottom a ventilation hole. So this I want to drag in there. And this is going to give us simply a ventilation hole. Now, before we start with the actual particles, I want to give this a collision shape. And the shape here should be fairly
How long you been streaming? For game development or total? I'm like streaming on and off 7 years. Maybe more, but now I'm just started in the January 10th, so not even a month.
Straightforward. This needs to have a collision shape. The shape should be a circle shape. And let's align it more or less accurately. This is looking good. Cool. Also, I want to move the collision shape behind the sprite so we can see a bit better what's going on. Right now, this kind of object is going to look incredibly boring inside of the game. And to make it more interesting, I want to generate smoke that moves something like this. So we have smoke coming out of this and moving in a certain direction. And to create something like smoke, we will need a particle emitter. And like everything else in Godot, this is going to be another node. So with the Steam vent selected, I click on Controller Command A, and now I type in particle. We have CPU particles and GPU particles, at least in
This
a 2D
is first
space.
time we use particles.
Inside of the 3D space,
in
all of that
tutorials.
gets a lot more complex. But in our case, we only have 2 nodes. And if you look at the description, we get a CPU-based particle emitter or a GPU-based particle emitter. Now, you might be wondering, what's the difference between these two? And well, if you're creating lots of particles, you want them to run on the GPU, because the GPU is much more powerful and much better at processing these kinds of particles. Unfortunately, you don't always have a graphics card available. For example, when you make a mobile game or a browser game, you might have to work with less powerful hardware. And for that, you would use CPU particles. But in our case, we are making a game for a computer, so I want to use GPU particles. Basically, the way you want to think about it is that CPU particles is for weaker systems, GPU particles is for everything else. So let's work with GPU particles 2D. I can click on Create and nothing happened. To make something happen, we have to look on the right in the inspector. The most important attribute in there is the process material. Right now, this one is empty. We can give it a shader material or a particle process material. The second one is what we want to go for. And now we can actually see something. We have a couple of particles going in one direction, which arguably isn't particularly helpful, but we can customize all of that quite a bit. If you click on particle process material, there we get a whole bunch of options. For example, what we could be doing is set the emission shape. Right now, it's a point. This means all particles are emitted from this one point. But in my case, I want to have a sphere, and this sphere should have a certain size, depending on how large you want this area to be. So I think a bit smaller than this should be okay. And yeah, this one is looking better. If you want the particles to stop falling,
okay. There is too much thing in here. Not enough in here. Let me check that. Change this where some of the particle customization options are in the menu. Emission shape is under the spawn. Okay. This is the emission shape. Gravity is under the acceleration menu. Gravity is here. And scale is under display. Okay. This video using old version of Godot, so comments. Would you like some custom designs for your channel though? I do have some ideas for you. If you like to hear me out. I don't care about the stream. I just open the stream because I want some people help me while code. Not trying to grow the stream. I just want knowledgeable people come to stream and help while I learn. Thank you for offer though.
you would want to look at gravity. We have 0.
This is why I don't have alerts, etc. Yeah, nice to meet you too. This is the shape I will
98 and
change.
0.
What to
98
change?
and
Cipher. Yes, cipher. Emission cipher radius. Yes. 50.
okay. And yeah, this one is looking better. If you want the particles to stop falling, you would want to look at gravity. We have 0, 98, and 0. If I set all of this to 0, 0, and 0, we get no movement at all. And in my case, I want the particles to move to the top right, so this direction. For that, I want to have x being positive, let's say, I don't know, 50, and then I want them to go up, and this would be negative, I don't know, let's say 45, just to have some random numbers. With that, we already get some nicer behavior. So this doesn't look terrible. Well, it still looks terrible, but it looks less terrible than before. One way to make all of this look much nicer is to look at this scale. Because in there, we have scale minimum and scale maximum. And Godot is going to pick a random number in between. Right now, they're both 1, so we always have a scale of 1. But if I make that much larger, we're getting a better behavior. So this is definitely coming together. If I now go back to the level and with the ground node selected, add this scene, I want to add the steam vent. And this I want to have, let me move it around. Let's put it somewhere there for now. If I now run the game again, we have a steam vent. Although this doesn't look amazing right now, but I guess you can at the very least tell what's going on somewhat. The major issue we have right now is that we always have a square. So this isn't great. And this we cannot change inside of the process material. So this I want to minimize for now. Instead, what we need is a texture. And the texture is going to be an image. So under, I think I put it under decals, there we have white.png. This is the graphic I want to use. And to use it, I simply have to drag it into the texture. And now we are
Okay. Okay. Graphics. Get that. Details. Have that.
getting some very strange behavior. The reason why this is happening is because the graphic is way too large. Or more specifically, inside of the process material under scale, we have a way too large maximum scale. Let's set this to a 3, and this is going to feel much better.
Yeah, I need to find this. Why you don't download this? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Now we have white PNG. Where is my white? Come on, dude. Not the Godot one. Give me a sec. Okay. Let's move to the next part.
And this is looking much more like actual Steam. So let's try this again. And well, we are making progress. Still not amazing, but certainly better. I suppose the most important thing for now is we don't have that many dots. And for that, at the amount all the way at the top, I want to set this to, let's go with 20. And this is feeling a little bit better. Another thing that you could be doing, if you look at color, there we have color and color ramp. For example, you could change the opacity a bit and then make all of this a touch darker. And I think we do need a lot more dots. So instead of 20, let's go with 60. And possibly even higher, maybe 100.
60 enough.
That probably feels a good bit better. What I can also do is lower the opacity and then just see what feels good. When it comes to particle systems, you do want to play around a lot, and there's a lot of stuff you can do. So all of these options, you can just play with them and see what you like. What you see quite often is a ramp. So in this case, the color ramp. What this one is doing right now, it's empty. If I give it a new gradient texture 1D, then we get some weird behavior. And what this one is doing is when a particle is spawned, it starts with black, and then over time it becomes white. We could change this. So if I click on it and double click on that, we get another color. And let's say I want a particle to start white with full transparency. And then towards the end, so I click on the ending bit, I want transparency to go basically away entirely and have this thing go into a darker color. And there you can see we have a new gradient, and this one is giving us a different kind of behavior. And that should be a decently okayish behavior for inside of the game. So once again, for this kind of thing, you do want to play around a lot to get the kind of look that you want. You could also change the scale and give this one a curve. But in my case, I think the color was a bit too strong. So let me give this a bit more opacity, especially towards the end. This might have been a bit too low.
Okay.
And then the color could be a bit brighter.
I understand what he is doing, but
and then
I don't
also
understand
want to
what
have,
I am doing.
for the gravity, slightly faster movement. So instead of 50, I want 100. Instead of negative 45, I want to have negative 150. On top of that, the emission shape could be a bit larger. So this feels better. And then for the amount of particles, let's go with 200. And there we go. This is coming together much better. So with that, we have some steam. And what you really want to be aware of, that you are spawning a huge amount of particles. And for that, if you have a proper GPU, this isn't going to be too taxing, especially in a 2D environment. But still, you do want to be conscious of the performance. So use this sparingly. One good way to do that is to only have a certain amount of particles. 200 is still fine, but in your own game, test this a lot. Changing the amount of particles can make a huge difference. I suppose I should also mention we have time, collision, drawing, and trails. Time is the one I want to focus on for now, and there, for example, we have a lifetime. If we extend that, we get much longer living particles. Although in my case, I'm not really interested in that, and this is still way too long. Let's set this to 1.5 to some kind of custom value. And what is much more important, you can also set one shot. This is something we are going to explore in just a bit. But if I set this one to on, then we get lots of particles and then they disappear because we are only spawning every particle just once. And you can see at the top, emitting is off. If I set this to on again, we get all of the particles, but just once, and there we go. We can do this multiple times, and we only always have one round of particles. Now for this one, I don't want to enable it. So I just want to have emitting enabled and one shot set to false. Now besides that, you could also look at drawing or collision, but all of this is a bit more advanced, so I'm going to ignore it. Instead, what I want you guys to do is when the player is shooting a laser.
Yeah. I can't do nothing yet.
Collision, but all of this is a bit more. So I just want to have emitting enabled and one shot set to false. Now besides that, you could also look at drawing or collision, but all of this is a bit more advanced, so I'm going to ignore it. Instead, what I want you guys to do is when the player is shooting a laser. Inside of the player, I want you guys to spawn some particles along with the laser. And to be a bit more precise, for the exercise, I want you guys to emit particles when the player is shooting a laser. You can reuse the same texture, but make sure that you are changing lots of other attributes, like the color or the scaling or the duration. Just see what looks good. Finally, a really important part is that one shot needs to be enabled.
Good, good, good. Way slow than I think. Where is now? There is no. I accept this as a smoke. I have problem with artistic value, but it works. I wanna move this to here.
We only want to spawn a couple of particles with the player selected. I want to add another node, which is going to be GPU particles 2D. This one right now is giving us a warning that we don't have a material. For that, I want to have a process material, which is going to be a particle process material. If I have that selected, we get particles that are barely visible. And right away, we have to make one change. And that is that these particles should be at the nozzle of the gun, basically here. Next up, the direction doesn't work at all. So this one we also have to update. That we can do quite easily. Inside of the process material, I want to update the direction. Although to be a bit more specific, we have direction and we have the gravity. The gravity by default should be 0, 0, and 0, so the particles don't move at all. However, then we have a direction, which right now by default is 1, 0, and 0. So we should only have movement in the x-axis. But this we can't see at all right now. Everything just is static, so we have a white dot there. To change that, we want to give each particle an initial velocity. And this we can do on the right. There we have initial velocity. And let's give it some randomness, so something like this. And that is looking significantly better. For these numbers inside of direction, you can update the spread. In my case, I went with 15. This is a much more narrow range, but once again, just choose whatever you think is looking good. Besides that, if I minimize these two tabs, the next important part is we will need a texture. And I still have white.png, and this I want to drag in there. And with that, we get something much more visible. So this is a good start. And let's try the scene itself. And let's hope this is still working. And yeah, it's kind of working, especially if you move around. This doesn't work perfectly yet, but at the very least we get something. The main thing I'm looking for is that all of this aligns with the player direction. So if the player moves or looks at the top right, the particles move in this direction as well. Which they do, so this is a good start. The one important thing that might be a bit of a challenge is that we only want to spawn these particles when the player is shooting a laser. And for that, under time, I want to set one shot and enable it and set it to true. And now inside of the code, so the player code, and this I do want to extend. Whenever we have an input action for the primary action, this if statement, I want to emit the particles, which I can do quite easily. I want to get my particles node, so GPU particles 2D, and this has an attribute called emitting, which I want to set to true. And that is actually all we needed. So if I now run the game again, I can shoot a laser, and there we get a couple of particles. I can do this multiple times, and we get a couple of particles. So this is working, but the particles look terrible. So this isn't great yet. Also, if I shoot multiple lasers, this is really inconsistent. So we have to update some things, which means with the GPU particles select,
Can do this, right? Should be working now. Okay, this is work too. Why he did it on the layer one though? I wanna ask that to him. Cause this is work as same as well. I wanna do this. I see one problem why he do that. Now I draw player on top of everything, so if I shoot, I can cover up the smoke. But in real life, in a top-down shooter, can never cover up the smoke because it's always on top. Yeah. Really? Can I change that? I think I can. Let's test this now. Yeah, maybe. This is one and laser two. Yeah. Now it's okay. So there is not that a big of problem. Is this work? Yeah. So what's the problem with doing this laser sight or player sight?
Like
Let's
that,
move on.
we
Maybe
have to
hit help.
update a lot of these attributes to make all of this look good. What I started with was the initial velocity. Right now, this is quite low. I have set these numbers to 750 and 1000. If I run all of this again, we get particles that move really, really far because, well, we have a really high initial velocity. To account for this increased speed, I want to set the lifetime of each particle to a much lower number, let's say 0.2. And now if I run this again, each particle moves very, very quickly. So this is definitely an improvement. Although all of the particles are still much too large. For that, on the scale, I want to have a scale minimum of 0.05 and a scale maximum of 0.1. If I run that again,
Can't see shit.
now we get particles that are way too small. So these numbers are probably a bit overly aggressive. Let's say 0.5 and 1. And that's feeling a bit better. I guess 0.3 and 0.8 should work. And this is just a thing you have to practice over and over. Eventually, you find some numbers that you like. Next up though, much more importantly, I want to work on the color. This is the part that really doesn't
Okay,
work
this
right now.
part
Instead of a white color, I want to have
I
some
don't care at
light
this moment
bluish because that's the color
because
of the
I need to
laser as
learn
well.
more technical
Also,
stuff
the
to
transparency
go
should not
into
be full. I want to have
visuals.
some fairly see-through kind of color. So if I run this again, that is starting to come together much more nicely. Also, we can give this a color ramp, which is a gradient texture 1D. And for this one,
I like
we
the
can set a
gradient
color.
texture part though.
The starting color is the color I have just set. And in there, we have a hexadecimal color. This we can simply copy with Control or Command S and then paste it in there. Now we get this starting color. And for the end color, I want to have the same color, except I want to make this more whitish and less transparent. At the end, you should have some kind of gradient that looks something like this. We start with a bluish tint and then we become more and more transparent. if I run that one again, we get something that's barely visible. So we want this to be more. So we want to increase these numbers a bit.
Okay,
And
mine
once again,
is
this is just
really
something you have
cool.
to play around with.
Just imagine this is a smoke.
We get some very faint particle effects. Although I think the initial velocity could even be higher. Let's go with 1200 to 1500. And there's certainly something that works. And I don't want to keep you here for too long. You can play around with all of this to a great
Lifetime
extent.
is too long, though.
And if you want your game to look good, then obviously you have to spend a lot of time with all of this. In my case though, this is a tutorial, so let's say for this part we are basically done. The next major aspect that I want to work on is going to be light, which is super important to make games look good. And in Godot, there isn't that much to it. It's quite easy to work with light. Ultimately, there are two nodes that you can use. Number one is called a point light, and this is a single point of light that you have somewhere in your level. So think of a flashlight or any kind of lamp. Besides, is called, and oh, let's say for this part we are basically done.
I missed the light
Easy
part.
to work with light.
Okay, we go
Ultimately,
on new nodes.
there are two
Lights.
nodes that you can use. Number one is called a point light, and this is a single point of light that you have somewhere in your level. So think of a flashlight or any kind of lamp.
Oh, I see a new problem with this. Does he want to shoot laser from 3 different space? The smoke never comes from the middle always. That's bad. So there is a one reason to do on player. To pick only one spot. But I don't even understand why he choose spawning random places for a laser. If you shoot a gun, gun shoots only one part.
Besides that,
I mean, maybe he tryna replace the recoil part. I don't know.
we have a directional light, and this is a light from a direction that usually is really far away. The best example for that would be a sun. Although if you want to have some general lighting for your scene to create a certain kind of atmosphere, you would also use a directional light. That being said though, most of the time you would combine a point light and a directional light all over your scene. Using lights is a really common thing. You are doing that basically everywhere. Now, besides those two nodes, we have one more concept, and that is called light occluder, which is basically a shape that a light can collide with. So far, we have used collision bodies with a collision shape, and a light occluder does the same thing just for light. And that is all we need to get started, so let's have a look at all of this in practice. Back in Godot, I want to create a whole new light. So with a new scene selected, I want to create another node, and the root node is going to be a static body 2D. Let's call this one a simple light. We are going to need a sprite 2D, and the sprite 2D we find under graphics. There we have objects, and under objects we have light.png. This I want to drag into the texture, and there we get a basic light. This one is also going to need a collision shape, so with simple light selected once again, I want to give it a collision shape 2D. And I think for this one, a capsule shape is probably best, although I do want to transform it and give it a rotation of 90 degrees, and now we can drag it out to cover the area that we need. That is looking roughly okay. Now I want to move the collision shape behind the sprite 2D, so we can see what's going on. And now we have a basic static object. Let's save it right away, under scenes, objects, and there we have simple light. Now this light I want to use inside of the house right away. So in there, let me attach a new scene, which is going to be this simple light. And this simple light, I want to move somewhere. Let's put it here on the right side. So if I zoom in, I can place it a bit better. And if we use transform, we can give this a -90 rotation, although the proper rotation would be +90 degrees, because this area is where the light is coming from. And then we can move it a bit further to the right. And then we have some kind of light. So this is certainly a start. But, well, we don't actually have any kind of light. All we have is a lamp that is switched off. For that, back in the simple light, we have to work with light nodes. And for that, with the simple light selected, I want to attach another node. If I simply type light, we can see we have a directional light, a point light, and a light occluder. Since we want to have a local light, which means a light from one point, we want to have a point light. So this I want to create. And this changes nothing, and we are getting a warning. If I hover over that, Godot is complaining that we are missing a texture. And the texture we are placing in there. And to get a texture, I want to minimize the objects, and we have a folder called lights. In there we have textures, and in there we have circled.
Okay, we need lights. Okay, where is the light? Finally. Okay. I hope I don't get viruses from these folders though.
.png. This I want to drag in there. I don't want to drag it on the editor. I want to drag it into the texture. That is looking better. And you can already tell if I toggle the visibility of the point light, we have some kind of light. And now if I save the entire scene and go back to the house, you can see we have a brighter color around this area. And this is the light. I can make this even more noticeable. So on the right in the inspector, we have a couple of attributes that we can work with. The texture scale, the color, and the energy are the attributes you want to care most about. Color is the easiest one to see. In there, by default, we have white, but we can change this to any color we want. Let's say in my case, I want to have a bluish color. That should still be quite bright because we have a light, but something like this should be much better. And now I save the scene, go back to the house, and now we have a bluish light around this area. Still not particularly visible because the energy for this light is quite low. If I make this brighter, you can already see we have a much more noticeable light. So now if I go back to the house, there we have a very strong light. And if you want to change the scale of the light or how far this light is reaching, you would work with the texture scale. If I increase that one to a really large number and return to the house, now we can see the light is illuminating basically all of the house. Although this is way too much, let's put this at a 2. That should be much better. And yeah, I think this is reasonably okay. Although this is way too much, let's put this at a 2. That should be much better. And yeah, I think this is reasonably okay. On top of that, if I go back to the level, we can see all of that as well. And if I run the game and go to this area, it still is going to take some time. But there we have the light, and the player is also reacting with the light. So this is working.
What's happening?
Quite well. Cool. Now, this is a good start, but it's still fairly limited. And the main issue we have are shadows. So right now we are...
I mean, the main issue, not shadows, though. Main issue, the light hitting in the outside area of the house is the main issue in my mind.
illuminating all of this area. Let me zoom out a bit. We are illuminating all of this, but this is not how a light works. Instead, I just want to have a cone that goes something like this. Or at the very least, I want to have shadows around the back of the light and along the main wall of the tile map. For that, we have to learn about another node. So back inside of the simple light, I want to add another node, and this node
Shader?
is a light occluder 2D.
Oh, right.
If I create that one, nothing is going to happen. To make something happen inside of the inspector, we have an occluder, and this is just a shape. So we have to give it a polygon, and then on top we have the tools to draw another shape. So let me draw a couple of basic points around this. Doesn't have to be too specific, but once again, if this is your game, make sure that you are spending a fair bit of time on this, because this is what makes the game look good. Cool. And now if I have the shape, you can see some parts do have light and other parts are blacked out. If I save all of this and go back to the level, we can see that now this part is not visible anymore. Now, this still isn't looking great, and to make it look much better, back in Simple Light, we want to enable shadows. If I switch that one on, we get some slightly weird effect inside of Simple Light, but if I look back at the house, this is looking significantly better. Now we get some proper light behavior. The light possibly is a bit strong inside of great, and to make it look much better, back in Simple Light, we want to enable shadows. If I switch that one on, we get some slightly weird effect inside of Simple Light, but if I look back at the house, this is looking significant. Enable shadow. This part is not visible anymore. Now, this still isn't looking great, and to make it look much better, back in Simple Light, we want to enable shadows.
Good, that's good.
If I switch that one on, we get some slightly weird effect inside of Simple Light, but if I look back at the house, this is looking significantly better. Now we get some proper light behavior. The light possibly is a bit strong But this is something you can fine tune on your own. Now, for the shadow, you can also customize a couple of bits. Most importantly, you have the color and the filter. Color is fairly straightforward, so if you change this to something really weird, you can create any kind of color for the shadow that you want. Although this is not something you particularly want to do, because the shadow at some point has to disappear. Like you can see in this corner, there the shadow disappears. But for the other areas, like this, getting the shadow back to 0 might take forever. So you want to be really careful, especially for the alpha value of the shadow. Most of the time you want to have a really dark shadow, because shadows in general are black. They are the absence of light, so you don't want to have a bright shadow. That being said, we can give it a slight bluish color to match it with the light. So if I have something like this is, well, it's getting a bit better, but you don't want to have a shadow too visible. Besides that, what you can do is work on the filter. And there are 3 different kinds of filters that you can work with. By default, you have none. And this is the fastest or the easiest one to calculate. However, if I go to PCF 13, then if I save all of this and go back to the level, now we have a much fuzzier outline for the shadow. So if I compare this with none and save all of this, we now have a sharp line for the shadow.
Don't need
And this is basically what the
performance
filter does.
boost. It's not worth the performance boost. Always choose fast.
And the more of a filter you use, the more difficult it is for your computer to process. So you do want to be careful with that. This is the kind of thing that can really tank your performance. I guess for this one, we can go with average and then give it a bit of smoothing and just see what happens. I guess this is an interesting effect, although not exactly what I want. If I add a lot more smoothing, there you can see what this one is doing. It creates a greater distance between these points. So I guess we should have very low amount between them. And if you zoom out, this is basically not noticeable anymore. So with that, let's run the game and let's see how this looks actually when we play it.
As a player perspective, like I have 25 years of playing experience, I prefer the fast one either way.
And this is looking at least acceptable.
For performance
but
and for
obviously,
visuals.
customize this as much as you want. One slight thing that annoys me is that we have these larger blue rays. And this is because of the color of the shadow. We want this to be a bit darker. So let's reduce the opacity and make all of this generally a bit darker. Now if I save this there, it's much less noticeable. Cool. And with that, we have some very basic light and some very basic shadows. And that is also a really good point to do an exercise. I want you guys to create another wall light. If you look at the graphics folder inside of objects, we have another image called wall-lamp.py.
Stu, Okay. Frustrating part about Godot is this selecting images on top of each other. I I'm sure there is a easier way and I don't know yet. I always click the wrong one. Okay. Right.
PNG. Use that to create another light. This light should also have a couple of occlusion shapes. Finally, make the player cast a shadow. Pause the video now and try to
Huh. Okay. This is a little bit too big for my house. Okay. We need to make player cast a shadow now. I think I can do this like this. It wasn't that hard. But how this shadow looks like a player though in real games. Now that's the hard part. Okay.
Implement all of that.
Finish the
I
exercise.
think we can
Nice.
start with the second part of the exercise. I want to make the player cast a shadow. This is quite easy to implement and quite fun. So back in the player scene, I want to give the player another node, which is going to be a light occluder 2D. For this one, once again, we will need an occluder polygon, and now we have to draw in a shape. This doesn't have to be too precise, but you do want to spend a few seconds on this at the very least. Because once again, the more work you put in here, the better your game is going to look. But in my case, this is a tutorial, so we can be a bit more sloppy. Although this was probably a bit very sloppy. But, well, there's not that much to say about it. We just have to draw a whole bunch of points around the player. Nearly done. There we go. And the one bit that annoys me is that this bit probably needs a bit more work. That's looking more acceptable. With that, our player has a light shape. Although we're getting an error.
This shows difference between artistic-minded game development and just gameplay-minded development. I came from playing games, so I accept this, and this don't irritate me. But look at how many points he clicked.
That a polygon must be supplied.
He probably artistic-based game developer.
And if we click outside of the node, this disappears. Now, if I go back to the level and run all of this again, I can move to the light. Take a few seconds, and there we can see our player is casting a light, which is looking really good. Also, if we rotate around, this works really, really well. Cool, I'm happy with this. So with that, we can come to the second part of the exercise. I want to create a new scene. The parent or root node is going to be a static body 2D again. Let's call this one the wall light. I suppose we can save this right away on the wall light right next to simple light. And then once again, we will need a sprite, which we are getting not from the lights, but from the objects. And all the way at the bottom, we have the wall lamp. This I want to drag into the sprite 2D like so. And now if I zoom out, you might have noticed that I made a mistake when I prepared this graphic, that there's way too much white space around it. This isn't actually going to be much of an issue because this shape doesn't have any kind of collision, although it is a bit annoying to work with. To update this, you have to go to region, then enable the region, and inside of edit region, you can create a proper shape around it, something like this. And now this is much easier to work with. Next up, we are going to need a collision. Let's go with a polygon 2D because there's no regular shape for all of this. And to draw a shape in, once again, I'm going to be quite sloppy with this one. And this is looking reasonably okay. Cool. Also, I want to move the collision shape behind the sprite 2D so we can see what's going on. With that, we have a light. And let's place this inside of the house right away. So with the house selected, I want to add the wall light. And I guess we can put this somewhere here-ish. Actually, let's put it right next to the other light so we can see how the two lights interact with each other. That might give us some cool effects. I want to rotate it by negative 90 degrees. And now I want to move both lights right next to each other. That's a good start. Next up, we have to actually create the light for this light. So I want to create a point light 2D. First of all, we need a texture. So under lights and textures, we have circle.png. This I want to drag in there. And now we have a light. I guess for this one, we can use a different kind of color. I guess what might look good is a bluish purpley color. Then we can increase the strength of all of this. And maybe the texture scale, since this is a larger light, it probably wants to have a bit more space. Let's try all of that. And let's look at the house individually. That is looking not bad at all. Or at least it's passable for tutorial. Let's try it in the game.
Forgot to
And if
enable
I
shadows,
walk
I guess.
over there, we get two different kinds of color, and they are working together quite well. So I'm happy with this. Although I forgot, for this wall light, we don't have a shadow. So this I want to enable. And now let's try this again. There we go. We can also get two shadows. So this is quite a cool effect. Very happy with it. Next up, I want to create a few occlusion shapes. And specifically, I want to mask out this holding thing, because this is the only thing that should cast a shadow, I think at least. So for that, I want to have a light occluder. This one is going to need a new shape. And now all I have to do is draw in a shape. This doesn't actually have to be too precise, but something like this should work quite well. And there we get, already we have the shadow. Now for the shadow for this one, I want to have some filter, so PCF5. That way it looks like the other one. I'm not going to mess with the color. I think this one is looking fine. Now there's one thing you need to be aware of when you are using a light occluder 2D. And that is you can only ever have a single shape. If I try to draw in another shape around the second bit, something like this, then the first shape disappears. So this you simply can't do. Let me undo it, and instead what you would do is copy this entire node. So with Ctrl and D, we are duplicating it. And now simply what I want to do is to mirror it along the x-axis. And a very simple way of doing that is under transform, I want to change the scale of x to -1 while leaving y at 1. To make that work, I want to click on the chain symbol. That way we can work on each axis individually. And all I want to do is set x to -1.
This learn new things.
All we have to do then is up.
I always wonder why I change in the scale X, the Y changes. Now
Position a tiny bit, and we are done. Probably be a bit more specific. Something like this looks good. And with that, I can save all of this, and let's have a look back at the level. This is definitely working. I guess one more thing that we could do is maybe a bit more energy for this one, since it is quite large. Yeah, I guess this is something that you can play around with, but for my purposes, I am totally happy with this kind of light. But now we have...
How are you happy with this kind of light, dude? It goes through walls.
another issue, and the issue is that all of the walls are illuminated, especially by the bigger light. This doesn't happen for the smaller light because we have an occlusion shape in between the two. But this simply doesn't work. There's way...
He wants us to house have the ocular. I got you now. Okay. He wants me to do this. He really wants me to do this. Please, please move simple light, not the other one. Just please move simple light. How? 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 Why? Why You just moving. Stupid shit. Really mad. No. Really, really mad. Chill. Let's just chill. Do this in one take. Wanna awaken my son.
Way too much light. To work on that, we have to look at the tile map. So inside of the tile map, I still have the physics layers open. If I minimize that, you can see we have more layers that we could work with. For example, there are navigation layers and custom data layers. On top of that, if you open rendering, there we have occlusion layers. Those cover light, and I want to add another element. If I add one, then we get a light mask. And these masks are fairly similar compared to the physics layers we have seen earlier. If I look at the wall light or the simple light, we always get an item cull mask. Those were kind of like the collision layers. So like we have done for physics, where an object can only see another object if it is on a certain mask. The same works with lights. Lights can only see objects that are on a certain layers. For this game though, I'm not going to change them. Everything is going to be on one layer to keep things simple. So I can minimize the occlusion layers, and now we have another problem. Like with physics, Godot doesn't know for each individual tile where the light begins and ends. And for that, if I maximize the tile set again and look at paint, we can select a property. So far, we worked in physics, but we can also work inside of the occlusion layer. If I click on that and zoom out, now you can already see where this is going, I think. We can draw again shapes. So for this one, I want to have one shape for this wall. And let me just do the 4 different walls for now, the one that are straight. So this one and this one. Then I can do this one and rotate all of this. And now we have the shapes for the wall. If I save all of this, you can already see the difference. And if I go back to the level in particular, now we can see the walls also have occlusion. That being said, to make all of this work properly, if I move the light around, you can see the issue we have with all of this. So this occlusion right now only works for the straight tiles. If I have a corner, this doesn't work at all anymore. Which means back in the tile map, in the tile set, we have to create occlusion shapes for all of this once again. So in my case, I'm going to speed up all of this, but well, you get more time to practice your shapes. So this is going to be another exercise for you.
Thank you. I'm happy with my light occluder. I go with this.
All right, with that, we have covered all of the shapes. Now, there's one thing I realized we're working on this. If I look at this one shape, let me draw it in again from scratch actually. So the issue for this one is we have 2 separate areas. And that's looking better. If I want to create a second one, I can start drawing, but then the original shape disappears. Turns out that for occlusion shapes, you cannot do this kind of area. But I guess in our case, this isn't too much of a noticeable issue. But when you design your own graphics for your game, just keep that in mind. But now for the rest of it, I can move the lights around. Let's say I want to duplicate them and place the lights throughout, and you can already see this is working quite well. We're getting pretty good light. So let me set the color back to default, move a light here. I can duplicate it again, move another light there, and then is a light going to fit on the left there? Probably not. Let's get rid of this one. And instead, I want to get the simple light and move that one. They can see selecting these lights can be kind of annoying because they always cover a larger area. If this becomes too much of an issue, you want to use this lock symbol. This one locks a node, so you can't select it anymore. So I want to select all of the existing nodes and then drag the simple light, and now I can move it around easily.
Nah.
For this one, for the transform, I want to have...
It's a solution for my problem, but not good enough. I don't want to click 10 times to lock, but I will click the soil lock. I hate that one moving always while I wanna
negative
move anything
90,
else.
so it points to the right, and have something like this. Then I can duplicate it again and move it between those 2 lights.
Okay, today
And the
I
rotation
learned
should be
particles and
negative
lights.
180.
Nice. 2
And
new
then I
nodes
can move it
for me.
right in between. And now the house has basically become a disco. But let's try how all of this looks in the actual game. So back inside all of this,
We still
we're
have
getting some
6
lights,
hours to
we're
go.
getting shadows, we're getting multiple shadows, and even when we have some walls, they also get shadows. So with that, we have a pretty good amount of light. I am quite happy with this. There's just one more light to cover, and this one is actually quite simple. So if I zoom out, The other light, let me minimize everything so we can see what's going on. The other light that I haven't covered yet is a directional light. And this one is incredibly simple. If I double click on that, our entire scene has become much brighter. And if I change the energy of this light, you can see that we are simply adding light to everything. You can also update the color. So if you don't want to have a pure white, you can change this to a reddish tone, or really whatever color you want. It's entirely up to you. And that's more or less all that you can do in here. You can also enable shadows, but
Just
that's
the
probably not
brightness,
what
I
you
guess.
want to do. I guess one thing that I found kind of useful is if you want to have a much darker level, then, well, you couldn't really set this to black because then this thing doesn't add anything. So if I have it to black and toggle it on and off, it doesn't do anything. Because the way light is working is that we are always adding the light, or rather, we are multiplying the current layer with a certain color. And the brighter the color is, the more noticeable it becomes. But if the color for the light is black, it doesn't change anything. So even if we change the energy for pure black, the light doesn't do anything. And that is because of the blend mode. Right now it's add, but if we change this to subtract, then we can, okay, the energy doesn't do anything, but if we now change the energy to something brighter, what is basically going to happen is that we are subtracting whatever color we have on this from the level. So the brighter it becomes, the more of a color we subtract from everything. So this shouldn't be entirely white, but if we have, let's say, a grayish color, something like this, this would allow us to make the entire game much darker. So if I now toggle this light, we get a darker game. That being said, the other lights are still working. So if I run all of this again and walk back to the house, we get a much more atmospheric game. Later on, when we are building the interior level, we're going to use this directional light quite a bit. Although for now, I'm going to get rid of it because for this outer scene, it wouldn't be particularly helpful. But keep it in mind, later on, we are going to reuse it a lot. And okay, with that, we have covered a really important part. So now we have lights. Next up, I want to talk about animations. And animations are ultimately quite simple. You basically always play images in a sequence. The issue with that is that there are two ways to store all of these images.
Okay. The animation part is long, so I'm gonna drop this part for tomorrow's stream. Finish animations, twin, and probably inheritance too. I wanna get the part, this gate becoming a loading screen. That's what I'm curious about the most at the moment. But I think it's this inheritance part or the creating inside level and adding level transition. This, so probably tomorrow stream or Sunday stream. I have two more streams this week. I will learn how to do this level transition. Probably it's easy, but I want to learn that part. It's important for me. So good night all. Thank you for watching.